Sandra Collins looked like any ordinary woman from a quiet town, but behind her gentle smile hid a secret so disturbing it would shock an entire community. She wasn't searching for love, friendship, or redemption. She was searching for a baby she could buy. Sandra Collins had always lived a quiet and unnoticed life in Maplewood, a small town where everyone knew everyone else's story. She lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment above a bakery, where the smell of fresh bread greeted her every morning. To her neighbors, Sandra was polite but distant, a woman who nodded politely but rarely joined conversations. She worked at a local grocery store, bagging groceries and restocking shelves, her days marked by routine and silence. What no one knew was that behind her calm, almost invisible exterior, she was fighting a growing storm of emptiness that had followed her for years. She had once imagined a simple life with a husband and children, filled with warmth and laughter. But that dream had slipped away long ago after a string of personal losses. Her marriage had ended badly, leaving her alone and bitter, and her attempts to rebuild her life always seemed to crumble. The one thing she had never been able to let go of was her desire to be a mother. When her adoption applications were repeatedly denied because of her unstable mental health record and lack of financial stability, something inside her began to change. What started as disappointment turned into obsession. Every night after work, she would sit at her small kitchen table, scrolling through online parenting forums and social media groups. She read stories of new mothers struggling to care for their babies, of families drowning in medical bills, of single women desperate for help. Those stories filled her with both sympathy and temptation. She began sending kind messages to strangers, offering emotional support, but deep down, her motives were shifting. The more she read about people unable to care for their infants, the more she convinced herself that she could give those babies a better life. It started with small thoughts that she tried to push away, but soon she began imagining it clearly. Walking through the park holding a child's hand, decorating a small bedroom with toys, hearing laughter echoing through her empty apartment. She told herself that if someone was struggling, giving them money in exchange for their baby wasn't cruel. It was practical. To her, it seemed like a fair trade that could help both sides. Her loneliness had blurred the line between compassion and delusion. Weeks passed, and her curiosity grew darker. She joined online groups that were less public, hidden behind privacy walls and coded names. Some were meant for struggling mothers. Others were thinly disguised black markets for adoption. Sandra read everything carefully, studying the language people use to avoid getting caught. She saw coded phrases like private arrangement and helping hands. She began to use those phrases herself, testing the waters. She started reaching out to women who mentioned financial troubles, offering to help with expenses. Her first few messages went unanswered. Then, one day, she received a reply from a young couple in another town. They were overwhelmed, broke, and had a newborn they didn't know how to care for. Sandra's heart raced as she read their words. She thought it was fate, a chance to finally have the family she had dreamed of. At that moment, she decided she wouldn't let anyone stop her this time. She was ready to cross any line necessary to fill the emptiness that had haunted her for so long. Sandra spent the next few days planning every detail of what she now believed was her destiny. The young couple she had contacted, Aaron and Tyler, lived 2 towns away in a struggling neighborhood on the edge of the city. They had posted online asking for financial help, explaining that they couldn't afford baby formula and rent at the same time. Sandra had responded immediately, her words carefully chosen, her tone gentle and understanding. At first, she offered small sums of money to gain their trust. When they thanked her politely, she took it as a sign that they were open to more. Gradually, her messages became bolder. She told them she could solve everything for them. Finally, she made her offer, $20,000 in cash in exchange for their newborn daughter. Aaron and Tyler were stunned. They didn't reply for 2 days, leaving Sandra anxious and restless. She barely slept, imagining what life would be like with a baby in her arms. She began buying small things: a soft pink blanket, a bottle warmer, a pack of newborn diapers. She arranged them neatly on her bed, as if preparing for a child that was already hers. The silence from the couple only made her more desperate. On the third day, a message appeared in her inbox. They said they were willing to talk in person. Sandra's hands shook as she read it. She believed they were ready to accept her offer. They chose a meeting place, a parking lot outside a family diner halfway between their towns. Sandra thought it was perfect. She liked that it was quiet, with just enough cars around to make it look normal. She began preparing for that day like it was a sacred event. She withdrew the money from her savings account in separate envelopes to avoid suspicion, then placed it all in a brown leather bag. She polished her car, planned her outfit, and even practiced what she would say to appear calm and sincere. But while Sandra believed she was creating a new beginning, someone else was already watching her. Unbeknownst to her, the young couple had grown uneasy after receiving her messages. They had shown them to a family friend who worked as a police officer. Within hours, the case was forwarded to the local cybercrime unit. Sandra's online chats and money withdrawal patterns raised immediate red flags. Investigators realized she was serious and potentially dangerous. They decided to set a trap. As the day of the meeting approached, Sandra's excitement grew. She told her coworkers she had to run an errand out of town, leaving work early with a nervous smile. On the drive to the diner, she played lullabies through her car speakers, imagining a baby sleeping in the back seat. Her mind was lost in a fantasy where everything was finally right. She didn't notice the unmarked cars following her at a distance, their tinted windows hiding the faces of officers preparing to end her plan. Sandra thought she was about to buy happiness, but what waited for her in that parking lot was the end of the life she had built on lies and delusion. The afternoon sun was low when Sandra pulled into the diner parking lot. The air was still, carrying the faint smell of fried food from the kitchen vents. She parked near the far corner, where she could see the entrance and the road leading out. Her heart pounded in steady waves of anticipation and fear. The brown leather bag sat beside her on the passenger seat, filled with neatly stacked bills wrapped in rubber bands. She looked at it again and smiled faintly, whispering to herself that soon everything would be different. To her, this moment felt like the turning point of her life, the day all her pain would finally have meaning. At the same time, a group of plainclothes officers watched her from several vehicles nearby. Their radios crackled quietly as they communicated, tracking every movement she made. They knew the couple she was supposed to meet was already cooperating. Aaron and Tyler were sitting in a car near the entrance, nervous and pale, following the detective's instructions. The entire area had been carefully set up. Hidden cameras had been installed around the diner lot earlier that morning, disguised as light fixtures and parked cars. Every angle of Sandra's car was covered. Sandra checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting her hair and smoothing her dress. She wanted to look calm and trustworthy, though her hands trembled as she reached for the bag. When she saw the couple's car pull in, she exhaled shakily. She grabbed the bag, stepped out of her vehicle, and walked toward them. Each step felt heavy and unreal. She was trembling, but not from fear. She believed she was walking toward her new life. Aaron rolled down the window slightly as Sandra approached, pretending to engage her while the officers watched closely. Sandra smiled, holding up the bag as if presenting a gift. She told them the money was all there, that she could take the baby right away and make things easier for everyone. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. She leaned slightly toward the back seat, where she could see the baby carrier covered with a blanket. The sight of it filled her with an emotion so strong she nearly cried. Her hand reached forward slowly, hovering over the blanket as if she were about to touch it. That was the signal the officers had been waiting for. Within seconds, several unmarked police cars roared to life, blocking the exits. Doors slammed open, and officers surrounded Sandra's car from all directions, shouting commands. The sound of their boots hitting the pavement echoed through the lot. Sandra froze, her body rigid, eyes wide with disbelief. One officer grabbed her arm and pushed her to the ground, while another secured the bag. The realization hit her slowly like a wave of cold water. She didn't struggle or scream. She just stared at the pavement as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Her plan, months in the making, had collapsed in an instant. The officers expected her to cry or beg, but she only whispered something no one could fully hear. The baby she thought she was saving had never been in danger. It had all been part of the trap. As the police cars pulled away, Sandra sat silently in the back seat, her eyes vacant, staring through the window at the diner sign glowing faintly in the distance. At the police station, Sandra sat alone in a small gray room with fluorescent lights that hummed above her head. Her wrists bore faint red marks from the cuffs, and her eyes stared blankly at the wall in front of her. The officers who had arrested her stood on the other side of the glass, discussing her behavior. She hadn't shouted, cried, or even tried to defend herself. She had simply gone quiet, as if she had already accepted what was happening. When detectives entered to question her, she responded politely, speaking in a calm, almost detached tone. She didn't deny what she had done. Instead, she explained it like it was something ordinary, insisting she only wanted to help a struggling family while giving a child the life she could provide. Her words were unsettlingly sincere, leaving the investigators uneasy. As the questioning continued, her past began to unfold piece by piece. Records from another state showed that Sandra once had a child of her own, a son named Daniel, who had been taken away by Child Protective Services almost 10 years earlier. Reports described neglect, untreated depression, and erratic behavior. She had been found unfit to parent after leaving the child unattended multiple times. The loss had broken her completely. After Daniel was placed in foster care, Sandra's life unraveled. She lost her job, her marriage collapsed, and she eventually moved to Maplewood to start over. She never spoke of her son again, not even to her co-workers. But investigators now saw the connection clearly. Her attempt to buy a baby was not about crime in her mind. It was about replacing what had been taken from her. When detectives searched her apartment, what they found painted a chilling picture. The small space looked like a nursery. A crib stood in the corner of the bedroom, still wrapped in plastic. The walls were decorated with cartoon decals of stars and clouds. Baby clothes were folded neatly on the dresser, each tagged with a handwritten note describing the imagined ages she thought her future child might reach. On the table was a stack of printed photos of infants, cut out from adoption websites and parenting magazines. Next to them lay an old photograph of her son, creased and faded from years of being handled. Alongside the emotional evidence were digital traces of her online activity that made the case even darker. Investigators discovered she had joined dozens of private social media groups that secretly discussed illegal adoption arrangements. Some of her messages went back months, each one offering money to desperate parents. She had contacted women in 3 different states, all with the same proposal. Some had ignored her, others had blocked her, but she had never stopped trying. Each rejection seemed to make her more determined. When the evidence was compiled, it became clear that Sandra had been preparing for this for a long time. The authorities realized her actions were not impulsive. They were the result of years of loneliness, mental decline, and a delusional belief that she could rewrite her past. As her story made its way into local headlines, Maplewood was shaken. People who had known her only as a quiet grocery store clerk could not reconcile that image with the woman described in the reports. Sandra remained silent in her cell, emotionless and still, as the world outside began to label her with names she no longer recognized. Sandra's trial began 6 months after her arrest. By then, her story had spread far beyond Maplewood, picked up by national news outlets and debated endlessly on social media. In court, she appeared calm, dressed neatly in a plain beige outfit, her hair pulled back tightly as if she wanted to disappear into herself. The courtroom was filled with reporters, curious townspeople, and families who had followed the case from the beginning. Every word spoken about her was dissected, every expression analyzed. Some saw her as a dangerous woman with twisted motives. Others viewed her as a broken soul consumed by grief. Sandra showed no visible reaction to either perspective. She sat quietly, her eyes downcast, her hands folded neatly in front of her. The prosecution built a strong case, presenting the evidence of her online messages, the hidden nursery, and the large amount of cash she had prepared. They painted her as manipulative, a woman who preyed on the vulnerability of struggling parents. They described her actions as deliberate and methodical, showing how she had planned every step, from withdrawing the money to arranging the meeting. The prosecutor emphasized that while she might not have intended physical harm, her actions still represented an attempt to traffic a human being for personal gain. It was a statement that made the courtroom fall silent. Her defense attorney argued that she was not a criminal but a deeply disturbed woman whose judgment had been clouded by loneliness and mental illness. He described her as someone incapable of understanding the legal or moral consequences of her actions, consumed entirely by the idea of being a mother again. He read entries from her personal diary aloud in court, pages filled with hopeful words about a baby she had named Lila, the child she believed she would soon hold. Those entries revealed a fragile mind trapped between fantasy and reality, a woman who convinced herself that buying a baby was an act of love rather than a crime. Despite the emotional defense, the jury took little time to reach a decision. The evidence was overwhelming, and Sandra's own calm admissions during questioning left no room for doubt. She was found guilty of attempted human trafficking and sentenced to 9 years in prison. When the verdict was read, she didn't flinch. There were no tears, no visible anger. She simply nodded once, as though she had expected it all along. Her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder, but she didn't respond. Inside prison, Sandra became known for her quiet behavior. She followed rules, never caused trouble, and spent hours sitting by herself in the library. Guards said she often read books about parenting and child psychology, sometimes staring at the pages for long stretches without turning them. She received no visitors. The world had moved on, but she remained frozen in her own time, still haunted by the image of the child she never had. Her story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how unchecked obsession can consume a person, as life until all that remains is the hollow shell of a dream that should never have been pursued.